The next name that we're going to be looking at is Jehovah Rapha. And we're going to go to Exodus chapter 15 where we find this name of God mentioned. Now I'm going to read to you just a few verses from Exodus chapter 15, and you'll remember that Moses has been bringing the people out of Egypt. They're heading into the wilderness, and we pick it up here, and it says in Exodus 15 and verse 22, "Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and there they went into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore they named it Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, 'What shall we drink?' And they cried to the Lord. And the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and it became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, 'If you will diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all of his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer.' Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water." Now, the first thing that I want to mention as we think about Jehovah Rapha, the Lord our healer, is that we have to remember just when and how sin and sickness came into the world. So you had Adam and Eve. They were there in the Garden of Eden. All was perfect. Everybody was healthy and well. But they decided to disobey God. And when they disobeyed God, He had to put them out. And it was there that sickness and disease was introduced into the world. And there we find sickness where their bodies were becoming sick, but their soul and their hearts were torn. They were separated from God. They needed healing in that area. Their relationship was broken down between God and man, and between man, man and woman, and the family. And just read those early chapters of Genesis. The whole thing just absolutely fell apart. And healing was needed in absolutely every area of life. So we come here to Exodus chapter 15, where we find this name where it says, "I am the Lord your healer." And we see what was going on here. They were looking for water. It was bitter. They were in a desperate situation. They'd been 3 days without water, walking in the wilderness. Of course they needed water. And they grumbled and they complained and they cried out to God. And God asked them to do something really simple. God showed them a log. When he threw the log into the water, it became sweet. And God said, "Okay, so I was testing you, and you done what I said, and keep doing what I said." And he says, "I'm going to keep you. I'm going to preserve you from all of those diseases, because I'm the Lord, your healer." Sometimes when we're talking about healing, it can be a touchy subject. I think that's fair to say. And I don't understand the ins and the outs of healing. I really don't. I don't think anybody does. Why some people are healed, some people aren't. And it can be complicated. It can be complicated. And each individual situation needs to be talked about in its own right. Because you can't just blanket statement everything, because everybody's situation is different. But what I was really struck by in this passage, where we find that God saying, "I'm the Lord your healer," it was actually about preservation, about God protecting them, God having his hand upon them, and God not allowing things to come upon them. And I was like, I started to think back, and I wonder how many times God has had his hand on me, where he has kept me from things. And maybe you could do well to pause for a wee moment or two and actually thank God for all of the things that you have been kept from, all of the things that he has preserved you from. And so I was thinking about God, our healer, and I was thinking about all of these ways where and areas where we need healing. And I started to find a few other verses that I want to throw out there where God is our healer. And I want to go to the Psalms. And in Psalm 103, we know that Psalm, I would say, quite well, some of us anyway. And Psalm 103 in verse 3, he says, he's blessing the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. And he says, who forgives all of our iniquity and heals all of our diseases. So here's the psalmist. He's praising God for all of the blessings that are coming with his relationship with God, and he's thanking God for healing from his diseases. And we could thank God for the healing and even for the modern medicine and everything that actually prevents, just like the context of this passage that we were looking at. And God has so many ways, and all of the times where God has really stepped in when people have been prayed for, and God has stepped in and brought healing. And we can thank God for that. The other one I was looking at in the Psalms was Psalm 147 and verse 3, where the psalmist says, He heals the brokenhearted and He binds up their wounds. That's something that we maybe could do well to think about, where God actually heals the brokenhearted. We're people who are ravaged by the devil and by sin, and they've been so broken. And maybe you have been there, where you have experienced such brokenheartedness, and you've spent time with God, you've come to Him, and you've found out that God heals the brokenhearted. And that's something that we could praise God for. Another one that I was thinking of, and thinking about relationships that are healed, and this is God actually healing a nation where in Hosea, and they were in exile and things were bad, and Hosea is looking forward to God bringing them back together again as a nation. And he says in Hosea chapter 6 there in verse 1, he says, Come, let us return to the Lord, for He has torn us that He may heal us. He has struck us down and He will bind us up. They were torn apart, they were broken, they were scattered, they were in a bad way. But Hosea is looking forward to a time where they were going to be healed, where they were going to be brought back together again. And God was going to heal a torn relationship and a torn nation. And then we can skip forward into the New Testament. And how many times do we read when Jesus was here on earth of people that He healed? Blind seeing, lame people walking again, a dead man rising from the grave. All of the people, you read so many times, multitudes coming, and He healed many when He was here. I don't know if you've watched any of the series The Chosen. I just thoroughly recommend it. Myself and Amy have watched it all, and we're thinking of going back and doing it all again. And it brings it all to life, where you see Jesus coming, and He's just being naturally supernatural. It's not all weird. And you just see Jesus, the Son of God, displaying such power with such humility and working these miracles of healing. And then it takes us right to the cross. And that famous passage. And I have to read some of the verses there from Isaiah chapter 53. And it says there, I'm sure a lot of us know it well. And it says, Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 5, But He was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon Him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with His stripes we are healed. Jehovah Rapha, I am the Lord who heals. And we see Jesus on the cross bringing this even closer to us, where we see that it was Jesus' sacrifice and the stripes that they laid on His back that were the price so that we could have healing in every part of our body, where we could have healing in our bodies, we could have healing in our hearts and in our souls, we could have healing and reconciliation in our relationship with God, but also in our relationship with other people. But you know what? It doesn't stop there. We started off right at Genesis talking about how sickness and disease came into the world and how relationships were broken, but we're going right to the very end of the book. Here in Revelation chapter 21, let me read these verses to you. It says there in Revelation 21 and verse 3, And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be His people, and God Himself will be with them as their God. There is the relationship that first was broken in the garden being put back together. But there's more benefits then that come along. It says, He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, for the former things have passed away. I love those verses. I love those verses. We're seeing God revealing Himself in Exodus as the God who heals, the Lord who heals. And right through the Old Testament, we're seeing different ways of how God does that. We're seeing how Jesus paid the price for it at the cross, and how we can live in the good of it today. But it comes to all of its fullness in Revelation, where God sets up His kingdom, where we get to be His people, and He will be our God in the fullest possible sense. And there's going to be no more weeping, no more pain, no more crying, for the former things have passed away. The brokenness and the sickness and the disease and all of those things, no more. The former things are passed away. And God, our healer, is going to bring all of it together and make all of these things new. I want to leave a couple of challenges with you here today. What if God is testing you the way He was testing them to see if they would put the stick in the water, if they would believe that God would provide and He would heal, that He would protect His people? He was asking them to do something that, let's face it, was relatively simple. And he was seeing if they would believe what He said. Maybe God is challenging you to do something simple. Maybe it is your body that needs healed. I wonder, could you actually go and in faith ask somebody to pray for you? Go to the elders of your church, or go to respected Christians that you know and say, would you pray for me, because I'm struggling with this, and I really, really want to be made well, and I want to ask God if He could maybe do it for me. I wonder, is it maybe a relationship that has broken down, and maybe God is asking you to forgive first. Maybe God is asking you to send the message, or to pick up the phone, or to call round with somebody and see if there's a way that things could be put right, and God's going to reconcile, to heal that relationship. I wonder, could you maybe thank God for all of the ways that you have been preserved tonight? To actually think back and say, God, I have been kept well. God, I have lived a good life. And God, I recognize that your hand has been in it, and you have been protecting me and keeping me from so many things. And God, I want to thank you for it. Maybe we could just pause and thank God for the day that we live in, where we have so many medical advances, where God's protection and God's hand of protection has been upon us in a way that, let's face it, people don't recognize that God is in and through it all, that every good and perfect gift comes from Him. And we need to pause tonight and be thankful that God is our healer. Maybe there's been difficult circumstances in your life, and you're like, but I've questions that are not answered. Let's remind ourselves that the book isn't finished yet. God is not finished yet, and He will someday put all things right, and there will be a day where there'll be no more pain, no more crying, no more suffering, as God brings it together and we realize that God is our healer. You need to know Him. You need to know Him, and we want to encourage you to get to know Him even more, because to know Him is life in all of its fullness for all of eternity.